Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me on this last session. I know it's a big effort, so it's awesome seeing you here. So a bit about myself. I did grow up in New Zealand, and I moved here a few years ago, so hopefully you can understand the accent okay. I look after our solution architecture team at Rookout. Rookout is a company that develops debugging tools, and as part of my role, I get to work with many different companies, from startups to larger enterprises, around their debugging strategies. How do they implement tools? What do they do around it? And what I hope to share with you today is some of the insights I got from these companies. All right, so let's switch to the next slide. All right, so as developers, we do a lot, right? And different people think that we do different things, but I'm sure you can all relate to that bottom right corner, is that a lot of what we do is putting out fires. Hopefully it's not the case, but I know that in the companies that I've worked at and with companies that I worked with, a lot of people spend a lot of time debugging. And I've looked up some stats from different studies. This is probably the most extreme study that showed that 75% of developers' time is spent on solving bugs. All right, now let that sink in. In a 5-day work week, it means that you only get a day and a bit to actually write new code. Again, this might be a bit extreme. The stats might be a bit different in your organizations, but it's a huge number. And it's a number that if we improve only by a little bit, it will have a massive amount of impact on the organization as a whole. All right, so let's do a bit of a survey here, a bit of a poll. If you were to get a new Jira ticket, what would you rather it be? A bug? Put your hand up. All right, cool. Or a feature? Okay, yeah, the audience never fails to cooperate. That's great. So as human beings, it's natural for us to want to work on new things, right? We want to work on exciting new technologies, deliver new features, start from a fresh, clean plate, rather than go back and fix an issue. And this is really one of the first problems around debugging, is that the fact that as developers, it's not something that excites us. It's not something that we fight over, right? We don't fight over who gets to fix this bug or not. And that leads us to this first problem, is that fixing old things is simply not as fun as creating something new. And that's human nature, not just at work, right? Like, we would rather get a new pair of pants than fix our old ones, or we would rather get a new toy than fixing something that got broken. So it's something that we need to be aware of. All right, moving on. I found this cool comic on XKCD. And what we've got here is that stick figure 1 asks stick figure 2 to just have a quick look at a bug that they've opened. And stick figure 2 asks, is this a normal bug or one of those horrifying ones that prove your whole project is broken beyond repair, and that everything should be burnt to the ground? And then they say it's a normal one, and turns out it's not. Okay, so this does represent the general feeling around bugs, right? You get given a bug, you don't know how serious it is, and when you go fix it, is it going to break a whole lot of other things? And that leads us to problem number 2. There's just too much pressure that causes stress and anxiety around these bugs and around fixing bugs. And it's something that we need to change, right? We don't want to have to approach something and feel like we're playing with a Jenga tower, that when I move this thing, everything will collapse. All right, on to the next example, showing us what's holding us back when it comes to debugging. So what I got here is a bit of a copy and paste that I did from a debugging exercise from a first-year course around software development for one of the top schools in the States. And here I've just highlighted some of the instructions they gave students in the assignment. We can see that the first thing they need to do is confirm the input, and to the function is what you think, step over that function, and look at the output. All right, that's great, that's the basics. But the fundamental flaw here is that this applies to old stacks. This doesn't apply to the stacks that we work with today. Even if you focus on front end, you still need to deal with things running on server side. You want to look at the data coming from there. And frankly, you can't always step over something running in the server in production. You know, if you're looking at things running on serverless and Kubernetes, it's just out of the question. You don't have those capabilities. So we're educating people. We're giving them tools that aren't relevant to today's world anymore. So the tools we give our teams are simply not right for the job at hand. And you see this in many organizations. There are tools that are there but they're not relevant for what I need. Do they give me the data that I need? Do they give me access to the logs I need? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it's important to bear that in mind when you build your strategy and when you look at how you build your team to tackle issues and bugs. All right, so I want to focus on what we can do. So we looked at some of the issues, and here are some thoughts around what we can do as organizations. And these are things that anyone can do. It doesn't need to come from the VP engineering. It can come from a team lead. It can come from a developer themselves. And these are practical tools that we can take on a day-to-day basis. So we've split them into tools, processes, and people. And I'll start off with tools. And generally, as people, we tend to go to the tools first because you're like, oh, that's a simple solution. But I don't want us to forget about the other two pillars as well. So around tools, what can we do? We need to give our teams cloud-native toolbox, right? As we mentioned before, we need to make sure that the tools that we have are relevant for the job at hand. We want to ensure that these tools are integrated into our daily workflow. So if you're using a monitoring tool, a logging tool, that we actually get the data into where we work on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to go search for things. I want the things to come to me. I want to know that, I know how to use the tool. It's all well and good to introduce a fancy tool, but if no one knows how to use it, then when there's an issue at 3 a.m. in the morning, no one will go learning how to use it. One of the organizations that we use, they actually hold workshops every so often for their developers, going through refreshers how to use these tools. What do they need to do so that when there is an issue, they are fully equipped with using those tools. And the last thing here is that data is gold, but too much will weigh you down. And this is super, super, super important. And we'll talk about it when we talk about logs. But make sure you collect the data that you need and don't just collect data for the sake of data. Because when you have too much data, you get lost in it, you get swamped in it, and you won't get any insights out of it. I'm not very good with a clicker, am I? All right. So the tools will give us insights into resolving bugs earlier. That's the goal. We want to get to the bottom of it as early as possible. I'm sure we've all seen this graph before where the cost of solving a bug in the design phase is around 100th of the cost of solving that bug in production. And we want to use the tools to our advantage to get to the bottom of it as quickly and as early as possible. Now, one of the things that we rely on are monitoring tools, right? Things to pick up errors, performance issues, user interactions, and server monitoring. These are things that give us proactive insights into what's going on, right? Rather than waiting for a customer or the end user to complain that something's not working, we can pick things up as they happen in real time, and we can start tackling them in real time. And again, just like I said before, make sure that these are set up to give you the data that you need. Map out what could go wrong, map out what you need to monitor and track, and make sure that the data comes to you in a usable format. Now, around logs, I'm sure we all use them all the time. These are some of the important things we need to know and make sure we follow when we use logs, right? The first one is making sure we write meaningful log messages, right? If your company has a certain structure, a certain way of doing things, follow it. Make sure that it's meaningful not just to you, but the next person that will have to look at the log. All right, next thing is don't overdo it. We've talked about it before. We don't want to just print out logs for the sake of printing logs. I've worked with people who just, when we try and debug something together, they look at the logs and they get lost. There's just too much going on. And it also means that it's expensive, right? Not only is it not useful, it's also expensive. Use the right log level for the right use case and store them appropriately. Do you need to have those logs accessible in hot storage? At a click of a button, you want to see them? Or is it something that you can wait 15, 30 minutes for until you can access them? All right, and the last one is around dynamic observability tools. And again, this is really useful if we're working at the interface between front and back end. If we're looking at getting data straight out of production, we've got great tools like the console logs and other things to get insights into the front end. But when we rely on other teams to get data from them to see how that data goes through the processes and where the bug really lies, these are things that can come in handy in that particular instance. So how can we capture data directly from production? There's a suite of tools. I recommend you all to look them up and see how we can get that data in a click of a button with no downtime. And also ensuring that it's fully integrated into our processes and how people work, and that people are onboarded onto these tools. All right, moving on. So we talked about tools, but what I want to focus on now is people. And again, these are changes that we can all do. It doesn't require more budget. It doesn't require more resources. We can start implementing these things ourselves. And the first thing is to better market the debugging task. All right, so I did a quick survey. We had like 3 people say that they would prefer to work on a bug rather than a feature, but there are actually really strong pros around working on a bug. First of all, you know that it's something that really hurts someone. It's not just a random feature that someone dreamt up and you don't know whether it's going to be useful for someone. So it's something that someone really wants. There's also a challenge aspect to it, right? We all like puzzles, we all like quizzes. You know, this is something that didn't work, and now I've got the challenge to fix it. And so there are ways to market it, you know, if we're team leads to our teams, if we're within our peers, and they're actually have conversations with people who enjoy doing bugs and see why they get excited about it. The second thing is creating a team-based ownership mentality. So it's not my bug, it's not my issue, it's our issue. Okay, we are all in charge of making sure things work. And we need to work together on that. And the last one is establishing trust within various stakeholders. Now, this is super important. I've been on both sides of this, right? So when there's an issue, especially if it's customer facing, you might have the sales team or the customer success team breathing down your neck, all right? It's not good for anyone because it distracts you and it means you can't focus on the job at hand. And in order to overcome that, we need to build that trust between the stakeholders, right? So inform them, give them estimates, give them realistic estimates, make sure that they're able to communicate it properly with their customers. You know, get an environment of an understanding so that it's not you fighting them, it's you working together. All right, and the last aspect is around processes. So what can we change in the organization to enable us a better working environment to debug issues? The first one is adjusting the sprint commitment or the backlog if a bug comes in. And I know we all say that, and I know none of us do it. So really, really try and adjust the sprint commitment. If there's a bug that comes in that's going to take 2 days, make sure you have those conversations about what comes out. Again, it's going to build that trust with your stakeholders and making sure that you've got the time to really focus on it without the added stress. The next one is establishing a prioritization method for new bugs. And this is something that you should do before these bugs come in. So how does your team prioritize bugs? You know, work with your customer success teams. When there are issues that come from customers, what gets what priority? When do we have these discussions? You know, how much time do we allocate to fixing bugs versus working on the roadmap? These are conversations that all companies should have, and we should know those approaches before things actually happen. Next is have the groundwork already done for the developers. So that's if there's a bug, again, if it comes from the customer side or if it comes from elsewhere, make sure we give them all the information that they need. All right, this is the responsibility of team leads to make sure that whenever there's a ticket open, that it's got all the insights that we need, including logs, times when it happened. You know, you wouldn't want to start building a house without having the infrastructure work done. And the same thing is here. You don't want to start working on a bug when you don't have all the information that you need. And lastly, run retrospectives. Get in the habit of doing this regularly. I know, again, many people talk about it, not many people do it. Run retrospectives around what worked well. Identify those things. What could have been improved? And what are some of the things that are unknown? Like, we had an issue where one of our service providers failed, and so people weren't able to log into our product. You know, these things we can't foresee. Whose responsibility is it? Who needs to tackle it? Who needs to communicate with the customers? Who needs to get the information? Have these discussions so that you build that muscle, so that next time it happens, you know how to tackle it. All right, so debugging is a real team effort, and it should be something that should be top of mind for everyone in any organization, not just developers, not just sellers, everyone in the organization. There are lots of things that we can do, and we touched on some of those. And I'd love to continue that discussion with you and hear about what you do that's effective in your organizations. All right, so thank you. Cool.